Hello Bloomington, I'm Mayor Tim Busse with this week's Council Minute. Since we don't have a City Council meeting this week, I thought I'd spend a bit of time going into some of the numbers in our city budget, explaining how the budget is being impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and dispelling some of the budget myths that are working their way around the community right now. Last week, the City Council got a preliminary look from city staff at how the COVID crisis was going to impact the city's budget this year, next year, and in the following years. Let me say this about what we heard. It's a lot of information to process. And for a resident watching that meeting who is not as familiar as the council is with the background on the budget and the numbers, it was probably a little hard to follow. And on top of that, Minnesota has one of the most complicated tax systems in the country, which doesn't make any of it easier to understand. So I'm going to try and break it down a little bit more. Bloomington is fortunate to have one of the strongest tax bases in the state of Minnesota. The city has worked hard over many decades to grow our commercial and industrial areas, city businesses. In fact, Bloomington is one of the only cities in Minnesota where commercial property tax is 50% of the tax base. Residential housing makes up about 40% of the tax base. In other words, the value of all residential homes in Bloomington is 40% of the total property value of the community. What does that mean? It means that homeowners have a smaller share of the property tax pie because we have such a strong commercial tax base. That's a good thing. A really important part of that commercial property tax base is the Mall of America and the 47 hotels in our community. In fact, the mall and the hotels are about 15% of the total tax base. And because I know the question often comes up, yes, the mall is fully on the tax rolls and paying its fair share of taxes. So the property tax from the Mall of America is going to the city, Bloomington schools, and the county and the state. Now, in addition to property taxes, the hotels and MOA are good for the city because they provide other revenues. Every Bloomington hotel remits a lodging tax per room per night. Every ticket for places like Nickelodeon Universe and Flyover America at Mall of America pays an admissions tax. The bars and restaurants in those hotels and at MOA and around the city pay liquor tax. All of those special use taxes help offset the cost to taxpayers for city services. In fact, property taxes are only about 2/3 of the budget for city services. These special use taxes, like lodging and admissions, are almost 13% of the city budget, and they directly pay for city services. Very few other cities in Minnesota have a tax base as strong and have revenues other than property taxes as diverse as Bloomington does. And that's good for you as a resident. How? Well, every year when we are looking at our budget, we are paying attention to how much we ask residents to pay, and we also look at what residents in other cities pay. As you see, in past years, you see that Bloomington's cost for monthly services is near the lowest cost to residents for a median value home compared to other communities in 2020. The low monthly cost of services in Bloomington is due in part to these lodging and admissions tax revenues. Now, I know that people are careful with their checkbooks, and I've always felt that Bloomington's services are one of the best deals around. For a median valued home, a home whose value is right in the middle of all homes in Bloomington, the cost of monthly services is less than you would typically pay for phone, internet, and cable from Comcast. That's police and fire services, water to and from your home, safe streets, great parks, and so much more. Look, I know that there are some in the community who feel our taxes are too high in Bloomington, but the facts say something different. And providing high quality of life at a very reasonable price is something we've been proud of in Bloomington for a very long time. So that's good background when we start talking about how the pandemic is affecting Bloomington. As you know, the need to stay at home has caused the economy to come to a screeching halt. In Bloomington, that means that most of the hotel rooms are empty and the Mall of America is of course closed up tight. So those lodging and admission taxes that I just talked about are way down. Our city staff is looking at how much the pandemic will affect the city's revenues. And depending on how long the shutdown lasts and how long it takes to recover, our finance team estimates that the impact is somewhere between $7 and $11 million. That's out of a budget of $80 million. Staff is also looking at where we can save money by reducing spending, canceling programs and projects, and keeping facilities closed. Staff has shared that there are program costs and capital expenses of about $2 million that can be reduced immediately. So at the end of the year, there's probably going to be a shortfall of $5 to $9 million. And I'm optimistic that we can resolve it. We're working with our elected officials in St. Paul and Washington, D.C. as they are putting together relief packages. We have a rainy day fund, budget reserves at the city for emergencies, and I do have to admit I never expected we'd see a storm like this. My colleagues on the City Council and I will have a challenge as we go into the next year's budget and for a couple of years after that. I know that some people heard the presentation from our city manager as a warning that property taxes were going to go through the roof. Let me be clear about this. Nobody on the City Council or on the city staff has ever said that a huge property tax increase is the way that we solve this problem. When the city manager talked about the impact on residential property taxpayers, he was talking about the shift in the tax base that is likely to happen in the next couple of years as commercial values may go down. Every year, we look at a chart like this one, which shows how the tax base shifts between commercial and residential value every year. We may see something similar to what happened during the Great Recession 10 years ago with falling property values, except 10 years ago, it was both residential and commercial values that fell. If you were a homeowner back then, you remember it well. This time, it will probably happen more with commercial properties. What that means for the City Council is that we will have to continue doing our careful study of the budget just like we do every year. Every year, we consider what services you, our residents, value and what's reasonable to ask you to pay for those services. We will do the same going forward. So let me quickly touch on what we're doing today, and then I want to wrap up by addressing a couple of things very specifically. First, city facilities remain closed to the public and will remain closed until further notice. Our emergency declaration for Bloomington runs through June 30th, but it can be lifted earlier if guidance from the governor and the Minnesota Department of Health says it's safe to do so. At the council meeting on April 20th, I've asked staff to bring forward a decision about summer recreation programs, as well as an outline of what cost reductions we should expect and what service reductions the council could consider. In the meantime, we're going to trust our professional staff to continue keeping things going as smoothly as possible so that the services you receive from the city are one less thing you need to worry about right now. And I've asked our staff to make sure they continue to provide clear and consistent information during the pandemic. Having good, accurate, and fact-based information is essential right now. Unfortunately, I know that social media is not always the best place to get that kind of information. So I just want to take a moment to dispel a couple of whoppers on social media posted by people who want you to believe something different about Bloomington than what the facts would say. First, for the past couple of years, some people have been upset about the paved trail being built along the Minnesota River and have said Bloomington is on the hook for most of the cost. That is simply not true. That is a state of Minnesota funded project. The trail will be maintained by the state of Minnesota. There isn't a dollar of Bloomington money in that project. Some folks have criticized the rehabilitation of the old Cedar Avenue Bridge, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. Again, money that you pay for city services did not go into that project. That project was done with federal and state dollars and funds from the tax increment district in the South Loop around Mall of America. And recently I've heard criticism about the trail along France Avenue. Well, that is a Bloomington project, but because our staff is very good at finding funding for these kind of things, less than $1 million of the nearly $6 million project cost came from residents. The Bloomington funds were mostly from franchise fees on gas and electric bills, which were put in place several years ago specifically to maintain and build our trails and streets. Here's the bottom line, friends. We are all going through something that will redefine us as a society. It's far too early to know how we will be different, or what our economy will look like, or exactly how your local government needs to respond to get things back to normal. What we do know is that time will come. In the meanwhile, know that your city council members will continue to be focused on making sure Bloomington is the best place it can be, that it remains a really good bargain for the people who live here, for the quality of life you expect and you deserve, and that we are providing clear, truthful, and timely information. Folks, don't get sucked into the vortex of social media. Finally, friends, enjoy your families, enjoy our parks, enjoy all the great things we have here in Bloomington. We are in this together. Until next time, thanks for all that you do to make Bloomington such a special place to live. Stay well and stay healthy.